Hello, can you guys hear me? Hello? Four participants. Let's see. Bella. Chetney. Great. Angela. There we are. Had to hit start video. Can you guys hear me?
I can see you, but I can't hear you. If you've been talking, I haven't been hearing anything.
Can you hear me now, Chetney?
Are you talking? Because I can't hear.
Shoot. Okay.
Let me maybe it's me because I had to come in from my phone. Let me leave and come back in.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Allie, Bella, can you hear me, girls?
Yeah, I can hear. I had a little bit of a problem signing in. Like the home screen was like weird, but now I think I'm good. I
I
can hear
know
and see.
it was strange for me as well. It did something that it had never done before. Hopefully we have it
Yeah.
rectified now.
Okay, I hear you. I think it was just
Okay,
my phone.
good. All right. So what we'll go ahead and do is I'm going to share the screen, okay, ladies, and we're gonna go through the test. Does that sound okay?
That's perfect.
All right, great. Any questions or anything before? All right. So let's go ahead and share the screen and go
Mr.
right
Cowell,
into
real
the.
quick.
Yes.
I do. I was going over like the grades and the assignments and making sure everything was submitted. I submitted all the argument assignments, but it's saying missing on my end. But when I go
Okay.
to like do the submit again, it's not
Right.
letting me.
Really?
Yes. And it says missing when I've done them and I've sent them because it says submitted, but under the grades, it
Sure.
says missing.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll do two things, Chetney. If you would send me another Canvas message and I'll respond to it. I have your name down and set aside. I will check through your assignments to see which ones I do and do not have. And I also will I will make sure that the due date or the availability date is through the 14th of May. So then you should be able to, anyone should be able to make up for partial credit.
Okay. Yeah, because like I
turn anything
said,
in
under
before then.
the assignment, it says that it was submitted. But when you go into the grades and you look, it says missing.
Yes, I know, and that scares me. It literally does,
Okay.
because I had two students last semester who on my end I didn't receive two or three assignments from, right? Then they Canvas messaged me and told me that they had submitted those assignments. And I said, well, is there any way that you could verify it? Because I want to help you, but I'm going to need clearance with my dean, and showing that you had done so to warrant a change of grade. And
Well,
sure enough, they were able to show me evidence. They attached it to their Canvas message, evidence of a submission, and I still did not receive it on my end. But on account of that submission alone, what I did was just if they turned it in on time, I gave them anywhere from a 45 to a 50. If they turned it in late, I gave them anywhere from a 35 to a 40.
wait,
And just I had to do that blindly. That's the best I could do because I never could receive their
d-
assignments all the way through
d-
the semester, which drove me insane because I still have no idea why. So I hope it doesn't come to that. But just communicating with each other before I submit the final grades, Chetney and everyone for that matter,
wait,
to be able
are
to
you
get around that. Allie, you have a
are
comment,
you
hon?
are you caught up on all your grading? I just assumed some of them weren't graded yet, the ones that
Oh no,
showed.
not at all,
Oh,
not at
okay.
all.
So
Yeah,
I
and I am so sorry, but
no,
yeah,
no, I was just assuming you just hadn't gotten to the grading of several of them.
absolutely,
Okay, okay,
absolutely,
okay.
yes, yeah. So yeah, sorry about that. Um, yeah, no,
And I'm wondering
that
if
absolutely
maybe
is true.
I'm
I'm
wondering if
sorry.
maybe that's the reason why, because it hasn't been graded. So maybe it says missing. But like I said, when I go to the assignment itself, where the document of the articles in the top right hand corner, it says submitted.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what I'll do, okay, is I will give you
Um,
guys an update. You guys are obviously next. I hate to say it, but last, and it was just you guys started chronologically after everyone else. So therefore, in my other school, I submitted the grades last week and had to do so. So it just happened that way that you guys were kind of triaged last. So as I'm doing yours and getting on yours today, I will give you an update in a day or two and tell you, okay, I have graded assignments this topic through that topic. So if you have submitted it and have yet to receive a grade, please let me know now. So yeah, I will communicate with you throughout the week, okay? Regarding where I am on the grading. And I'll probably even give at least one more announcement on this subject to make that clear with everyone. Because I definitely don't want that to happen again as what happened in the previous semester with a couple other students, because
Perfect.
I still don't have an explanation for it as to
Okay.
why
Thank
I
you.
never received them.
Thank you.
No problem. All right. So, and please remember that also. I hate to say that, but as like a last resort of sorts, I could always institute a change of grade in the very worst case scenario. But I don't even see it coming to that, Chetney. When you inform me, like right now, I'll be in communication with you before I submit your final grade.
Okay. Yeah, I noticed that this morning because I went on to see if the test had itself been posted up yet or any of these Zoom links for this week. So then I just went to grades to check it out to see what has been graded, if things been updated. And then I noticed there was like 4 assignments and it said missing, but I know I've done every assignment.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, just give me a day or two, and
Okay.
I will like I said, I'll not only jump on your grades, but in yours in particular, Chetney, I have your name set aside, and I'll make sure that I've received them from you. Okay,
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
no problem. All right. Anyone else? Bella, Allie, you ladies doing okay? Thank you for your patience.
no, I mean, I know, yeah, I know mine hasn't been graded, but like, I know Chetney was having problems and stuff, but like mine has had like a little, the paper that it says it's being, graded that I've submitted. So I think I'm okay
Okay, good.
for mine.
Yeah, I like to think that those two cases were anomalies, because I often have up to 80 kids in each class, and I have 4 to 6 classes every semester at 2 different schools, and those 2 students, those are the only cases in which it happened. So I know in worst case scenario it could happen, but yeah, most of the time it does not. If you submit it, it should be It should be accepted by the system and eventually graded by me. All right. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to add 7 points to your test 3 test scores. Okay, ladies, for being here today. I appreciate that. And
That's
if there aren't,
wonderful. Thank you so much.
no problem. I at the least I can do. And so I'm going to go ahead and jump right into this. Okay. So with Andrew Jackson's time period, right, 1828 to 1836, when he was president, he was a beneficiary, not necessarily, the provocative force behind the changes that were going on. He benefited from those changes. Remember, we talked about there was relative, right, compared to the past. There, you could argue that there was relative democratization that happened, because remember, we have a republic, right, like Rome's, and Rome had their tribunes who were popularly elected, but they also had senators who were handpicked, right, and exchanged power with the lower elected tribunes. You had two proconsuls elected by the senators as like their chief executives. So they did not have a democracy, right? An outright rule by the people, by the demos. And neither do we. We have Supreme Court justices, right, who are handpicked for life. We have cabinet members who are handpicked and approved by the Senate. And then, of course, we have, at the time, senators were not popularly elected. They won't be until the 19 teens in the progressive era. And so that hasn't happened yet. So we have a republic and not a democracy. But there were ways in which our republic became democratized during this time period. And it seems like the salient part that I always read about when I read books on Jacksonian era is economics, the realm of economics. Okay, we have another Zanel. That's great to have you. Okay, economically, right? The War of 1812 ended, and we opened up territories, and we really opened up opportunities for land acquisition, for people to get cheap or even free land. We kind of made more liberal our rules in the courts on squatters' rights. If no one was inhabiting the land, no one was cultivating or using it, we allowed people to come in, and just by way of habitation and cultivation of the land, we let them gain easy or cheap or even free access to that land. There developed kind of a culture that was more egalitarian, that put more people on equal footing and stated right. Like I think of like the Charles River Bridge case, where you had Ivy League guys, and they tried to make the case in court that it was implied that they would have a monopoly in being able to build this bridge, this ferry business or bridge across the Charles River. And some kind of up and coming kind of parvenus, right? I remember a parvenu was like Beverly Hillbillies. It's someone who was born into poverty and suddenly comes into wealth. This was the era of the parvenu, arguably, but the white parvenu, the white male parvenu. And so now, right, these young men are trying to build a rival bridge. And it was decided in the Charles River Bridge case that we have a capitalist economy whereby people are free to copycat other people and to compete with them freely, right? You have a Home Depot, you could not only have a Lowe's, but you could have a Bob's hardware shop, established right across the street to compete with them. And so at any rate, you have like people like Alexis de Tocqueville, who traveled through about 5 states. And he made the observation that he was impressed compared to France, how much relative equality of economic condition he found here in America. That a lot of Americans, he thought numerically and proportionally, were just kind of humble origin, but not poverty ridden or stricken either. That they had a small parcel of land, and not just that, right? But that they expected life to get better, right? For them. Their expectations were high, that this was a land of economic opportunity for all, let's face it, at least white men, that they could engage in land speculation. Firstly, they could engage in squatting, and also you had an increased accessibility to loans. And let's face it, it takes money to make money. You had an increase in number and proportion of Americans who are becoming cash crop farmers, right? And really that's entrepreneurial. That's starting a business of your own and trying to chase after the American dream, and selling and making one type of farm commodity, whether it be wheat, corn, cotton, and selling it for profit in a local market. And so, at any rate, you do have evidence from Alexa de Tocqueville's book and from other contemporaries that suggests that they at least had the impression that more Americans were making it uh, in their generation than in previous generations. Were gaining access to land, gaining access to credit or loans, starting businesses. Oftentimes, the businesses, like I said, were farm oriented, but that they were beginning to make it and they were expecting to make it. He said that Americans had almost this feeling of entitlement, that life was going to get better for them. They just knew it. They expected it. And so they elected people that they identified with, right? Self-made parvenu men, right? Like Andrew Jackson, who was born of the Scots-Irish demographic. And remember, the Scots-Irish, just the previous generation of the War of Independence, they were arguably seen as scum of the earth. And now, right, that was a pivotal angle you could take to be elected, to show that you were a Scots-Irish, poor, poverty-stricken young man from the frontier of Kentucky or Tennessee, and were making it, right? And hence you didn't have anything handed to you. You weren't a beneficiary of the patronage system of England, whereby you were granted lands and titles and economic opportunities just because of your family connections, but that you earned it, right? As a self-made man, Henry Clay would say. And so this was the era of the self-made man being elected into office. So much so, right, that they used the term log cabin campaigns to suggest that if you wanted to win office, you better convey that image, even if it were false, that you were born in rather modest circumstances and earned your way up by the sweat of your own brow. So at any rate, that happened. And then in many states, they dropped property requirements for citizenship. I don't know if I'm going to get into that too much, but just know that, it was called the stake in society idea, that from England, that if you weren't a homeowner, that you didn't have much to lose, and hence you may not become a loyal, reliable member of the republic. And they began changing that, and almost every state dropped its property requirements for citizenship. So now you have a much larger constituency of men who are now enfranchised, right, incorporated legally into the republic. And you also have very high increase in popular participation in government. You look at election turnouts, you look at rallies and parades and other ways of participatory, quote, democracy. And you see an increase in it, at least according to the perceptions of contemporaries at that time, who felt as if that were happening. And we have stats. I don't know how they've been able to get them, but we have stats that seem to confirm this, that a higher proportion of the citizenry participated in one way or another in politics. And so, you contrast that with the era of the founding fathers. They wore the periwigs. They were well connected. Jefferson, even the quote, man of the people. We wrote about how, remember, he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth on behalf of his mother's Randolph connections and blood. And so now it seemed to be a little different. You also had the direct election of presidential electors. So it became at least closer to a popular vote for president. Now, did we get rid of the electoral system? No, we still have it, right? So keep that in mind for number one. But on the downside, right, Alexa de Tocqueville was concerned, like you see number 5 and number 2. He was concerned with, quote, too much democracy, right, developing here in the land, because what he saw politicians and the culture catering to this kind of populist and environment, this kind of populist culture. And to me, populism, right, is oftentimes it's used in a negative connotation, and that's the way I'm using it in class, is that you kind of appeal to the lowest common denominator. Whatever the popular prejudices are that the people have, their popular, let's say like xenophobia, their hateful fear of things outside their norm of what they're accustomed to, their intolerance, you cater to that rather than trying to sharpen or elevate it, right? And so hence, if they were anti-Native American, you ran on that platform and said, well, I'm going to take land from the Native Americans and give it to the common white American citizens and make it accessible for them. I'm going to take economic privilege and opportunities from the plutocracy, from the wealthiest, right? And I'm going to enhance the opportunity for the common man to gain loans and to gain access to entrepreneurial pursuits, right? And so hence you had to worry that if you were a numerical minority, if you weren't part of this kind of frontier, folklore, if you will, that you might have the ugly rage of the majority of citizens turn against you. So arguably there was, according to Tocqueville, an anti-intellectual sentiment, anti-Native American sentiment, anti-African American sentiment, a very almost misogynistic patriarchy against women, and that condescending view that would be later popularized like in the Victorian era of women being women, and that they're more virtuous but they're more fragile and they should stay in the domestic sphere and outside of the public sphere, that was not their realm. uh, that was all encouraged in this so-called democratic culture, right? So you did have to worry about tyranny of the majority, and Alexis de Tocqueville was concerned about that. He even contended that he was very, in particular, concerned about the popular election of local judges. He didn't like that idea because he felt like the judges were there to put a check on the numerical majority and to keep them from becoming tyrannical against minority groups, right? And so, remember, I kind of half jokingly stated that there's an old dictum that said sometimes democracy is like two wolves and one lamb voting on what's for dinner. Obviously, the two wolves are going to vote on eating the lamb. So that happened at this time period, right? This so-called democratic era. And so let's see here. So Andrew Jackson himself, like with number 4, he did rise with this frontier image. He did offer the majority of citizens what they wanted to hear: anti-Native American sentiment, anti-plutocracy sentiment, and privileged caste and intellectuals. They were against all those demographics, and they wanted the common man to have access to land, to credit, namely to the American dream. Okay. So all that is true. And then as a case in point, the Trail of Tears, right? And so with the Trail of Tears, remember, it eventually in the Worcester case, it became a case of states' rights versus the federal government. The federal government had granted land to the Native American civilized tribes, the Cherokee, Choctaw, and others, on behalf of treaties. And the states issued eminent domain laws trying to force the Native Americans to sell their lands. And yes, it was ironic because they were called the civilized tribes for a reason. They had largely assimilated. They had sent their kids to these white Christian schools and had them assimilate to whatever you would consider WASP Americana. They were becoming cash crop farmers, some even owning slaves. And they not only had schools and churches, but like I said, they were integrating economically into the local markets. And but it still wasn't good enough, right? Anti-Native American sentiment remained strong and pervasive. And so at any rate, the states, the Supreme Court sided with the federal government and stated that the states did not have the right to force Native Americans to sell lands that had been ceded to them by way of a federal treaty, because a federal treaty supersedes a state law. And the president, right? He he basically defied that Supreme Court decision, and he used his popular mandate, rhetoric. Remember, popular mandate like mandato in Spanish. We have a demand from the people. This is what the majority of people want. And it was almost as if, what the majority wants has got to be almost infallible, gospel truth and adhered to. And as the popularly elected president, he was beholden to his people, to his majority, to give them what they wanted. And then also he did use paternalistic rhetoric in defending the Trails of Tears and stating that the Native Americans and the WASP American citizens were like oil and water. They could never truly integrate, even if they wanted to, and that in that integration is not a foreseeable or doable option, that conflict would become inevitable, and that inevitably Native Americans would lose that conflict. So hence it was for their own protection and their own good that they be removed from their lands in the Carolinas and Georgia, etc., and be sent to Arkansas and Oklahoma into Indian territory, supposedly for their own good. Okay, so all that is supposedly the case with number 7. All right. Um, then moving on to antebellum westward expansion. All right. Number 7 was meant to be false. Remember, it was according to our argumentative assignment. Racism was overt. They didn't even try to hide it. As far as stereotypes of Hispanics, stereotypes of Native Americans, of African Americans, the whole Sambo image, all of that was perpetrated by way of the press, in primary source material of letters, of correspondence, and speeches by politicians. I mean, it got pretty nasty. Now, were some people above that type of xenophobia? Of course. The antebellum reformers, as a case in point. Many of the evangelical movement leaders were against racial discrimination as well. But they seem to have been a minority and their voice did not prevail. They're going to oppose the Mexican-American War, but some arguably in futile fashion, because what happens is going to happen. And so the loss of Texas on the next couple, remember, according to the Chicano historians, the Americans that went into the Austin area of Eastern Texas under Stephen Austin's colony, they were largely defiant by the second generation in large numbers. Remember, Mier y Terán came up and gave a report, and he contended that the Americans, yes, were enterprising, that they were economically getting change and improvements going, but at what cost, right? He said that they were haughty and defiant. They were arrogant and defiant of Mexican rules and expectations, bringing in slaves, refusing to pay their taxes after their tax haven period lapsed, and so that hence Santa Anna's one of his 2 very conservative constitutions, the first of 2, that was largely a pretext. It was largely an excuse for them to grab this land. And of course, remember, you had the rebellion by the 2 brothers known as the Fredonian Revolt, where they were trying to break free prior to Santa Anna's constitution. Now, in court American history, right, what we learn as kids, it was the April 6th colonization law that deported some Americans and kept further Anglo-American immigration into Mexican Texas. They prohibited such. And also Santa Anna's exceedingly conservative constitution. That were the reasons for which the Texans fought against the Mexican government for their independence. So both of those are true. Then you go on to the Mexican-American War, right? Number 10 is very argumentative. It's very subjective, okay? So I don't want you to imbibe it as the truth. But in the argumentative assignment, was that the argument that was conveyed? Yes, right? Blaming the American public, not just or not even the American leaders. And that, that flies in the face of evidence of leaders like James K. Polk, who makes a really good villain in Chicano history because he made it very clear that he coveted Mexican California. It shows evidence that he may have somewhat picked a fight with Mexico over the Texas border dispute and trying to purchase California after being told not to even try to do so as far as provoking the war. But that does fly in the face of number 10. But it still stands that on number 10, that in your argumentative assignment, that was the argument that was conveyed, that was defended. All right. So please keep that in mind. Okay. That was meant to be true, but it is argumentative as far as its veracity. And that's what I do on these argumentative assignments, right? I deliberately try to be one-sided and thought-provoking when there clearly is an oppositional view that can be defended as well. Then let's see here. And then number 11, that was also meant to be conveyed as true. That point you will find in the argumentative assignment on antebellum westward expansion. So much of these answers are found in your argumentative assignments. I would highly suggest going back through them, looking them over. Okay. And then with Frederick Jackson Turner, remember that his romantic thesis, right, was that the West renewed American meritocracy. It renewed what he thought ought to be Americana, what we stand for, and that is equality of opportunity for virtually everyone. That the West kind of served as like a leveler, if you will. It put everyone on level ground because it was equally dangerous and that there were equal opportunities for everyone, regardless of your demographic prior to coming into the West. So that if you were wealthy, you could just as easily drown in the Platte River, die on the Oregon Trail as a poor person could. And that if you were poor, you had entrepreneurial and other opportunities if you were quick enough on your feet, if you were intelligent enough and adaptive enough, that you had opportunities just as did the wealthy moving into the West. Okay. So equality of danger and equality of opportunity in renewing American meritocracy. You rise or fall on your own merit. That's all instrumental in Frederick Jackson Turner's thesis, right? So what might support that as far as, his thesis goes with the gold rush, etc. A temporary lack of institutions and a reputation for lawlessness in gold country? Absolutely, right? Because that's showing that it's equaling the playing field for everyone and being equally dangerous. And there is evidence for such. Mineral wealth extracted with little capital or expertise. You find that in the newspapers, the Spanish newspapers of 1848, when gold was first found. People, accruing a lot of gold, literally at the superficial level without any machinery needed, et cetera, et cetera. Opportunities to mine the miners, absolutely. You look at the Chinese immigrants as a case in point, providing laundry services, inns, opium dens, and it gets into the stereotypical, obviously, but those stereotypes came for a reason, with whatever fragment of truth that you could find in the primary sources. Foreign miners' taxes against Hispanics and Asians, that would not support Frederick Jackson Turner's thesis, right? Because that would not convey the thesis that there was equality of opportunity. He kind of glosses over discrimination and how that would give a much better footing for for WASP, Anglo Americans, over Hispanic and Asians, etc. All right. So let's see here. Evidence against his thesis. We talked about Marxist history, like Howard Zinn's book, that he contends that the West was no different. That Turner turned a blind eye to the fact that it takes money to make money, and big money won out in the West just as it did in the East. You look at the pneumatic and hydraulic drills. You look at the mechanical reaper and thresher and farming, and the big guys who had the capital to buy this machinery got a big leg up on those who could not afford such. All right. And then also discrimination, ethnic discrimination. That flies in the face of Turner's thesis as well. Okay. Let's see here. So then moving on to court history for the Civil War. Um, let's see here. There was a great awakening that supposedly conveyed a lot of kind of humanistic optimism that people could be perfected, that they could be improved, right? And that society can be improved. The transcendentalists, we talked about them and wanting all human beings, as particularly men, to transcend the lower level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and just living to work and to fill their stomach. That there's more to life than that, and that there is self cultivation, moral cultivation, intellectual cultivation. Um, and that all people ought to be free from any coercive institutions that would keep them from exercising their autonomy, their freedom and independence, and also their pursuit of betterment, right, in their own lives and for society. They had utopian societies. We went over all this, right? And so we did use all of that and Enlightenment idealism as evidence for antebellum exceptionalism, that this was an exceptional generation. Remember, this is court history, it's argumentative, but that this was not your average run of the mill generation, but the type of generation that wanted to challenge the status quo, challenge tradition, challenge authority, and make life better, right? So this was just a generation that would force their contemporaries to face slavery and the immorality thereof. All right. Antebellum reforms, we talked about their concern for the nuclear family being held together, their concern against bourgeois hegemony and us becoming basically just kind of like urbanized robots in this new consumer and an increasingly industrialized economy. They were concerned about both of those, and it was depicted in it was tied to a depiction of this being an idealistic generation. So all those are true. Antebellum reforms, we talked about prison and asylum reform. We talked about public education campaign, utopian movements. All those were mentioned. The temperance movement, the Sabbath movement, abolitionist movement, of course. All of those were mentioned, okay, as a case in point in support of court history. All right. Let's see here. Court history contends that an exceptional generation rocked the boat. They forced the nation to have discourse on the topic of slavery and to confront it, especially concerning the opening of the West, right? But that they took it on as a moral crusade, and it was fought to live up to the beliefs upon which we were allegedly born in our quote revolution, right? And so the whole faction thesis, that's revisionist because it's less romantic, right? The faction thesis conveys that it wasn't a crusade. It wasn't about the morality or immorality of slavery, but it was a power struggle, right? To try to get fellow bourgeois factory owners to populate the West versus getting slave owning planters, farmers to populate the West, and that they would become likely allies in the future in Congress. That's a revisionist take on it, not a court history take. Okay, the faction thesis. Radical Republicans, they were certainly not the conciliatory arm of the Republican Party. They were the radical wing, right? They were on much further left and wanting great changes. They didn't care about constitutional issues with slavery, right? They wanted to take it on. At the very least, they contended, like Abraham Lincoln, that because the West constituted at the time territory and not organized annexed states yet, that the federal government had the obligation and the right to keep slavery from spreading into those areas. Later on, at the end of the war, radical Republicans, according to Dunning's thesis, will be attached to the thesis that they were very not only idealistic and wanting to greatly improve the world and improve the plight for African Americans and freedmen, ex-slaves, but that they also were a bit vindictive, according to William Dunning and the Dunning's thesis, and they wanted to punish the white South. Okay, so they were certainly not the conciliatory, middle range segment of the Republican Party. Court history, right? Yes, we've already mentioned 21. With 22, remember, court history engages in character development with Abraham Lincoln. All right, and so it contends that, kind of like in literature, the protagonist Abraham Lincoln, he started off rather indifferent to slavery, rather moderate, even going up into the Civil War compared to the abolitionist, but that he came around just in time by the end of the Civil War to something that approximated a radical abolitionist, a radical Republican. Polarizing events, we talked about that, right? So drama, a lot of the drama was tied to the West. The interstate, the fugitive slave law and riots and so forth that were connected to that. That was mentioned. The Underground Railroad was mentioned, and the fear of slave insurrection. John Brown's attempt for a slave insurrection. Charles Sumner being beaten on the Senate floor. The Supreme Court making a decision in the Dred Scott case that the federal government was to preserve the Fifth Amendment right of all citizens to their right to property, no matter where they moved, even to a free state or into the Western territories. So all those were seen as polarizing events of the 1850s. Okay, moving on to number 24, the Civil War as a moral crusade. That is court history, not revisionist history. Revisionist history wants to revise that romanticized account. So they look at for revisionist history, they look at evidence of racism in the North, discrimination, perhaps even a little bit of Machiavellian manipulation by the North, and seeing the benefit of using the black male slaves as soldiers to help, in kind of divide and conquer type, thinking, divide the South and help the North win the war. So all of those are mentioned, right? As far as ulterior motives, racism, everything that would challenge the notion that this was an idealistic crusade to end slavery would be accounted as, in the broad term, revisionist history. With revisionist data on Abraham Lincoln, right? His Emancipation Proclamation did only declare slaves of rebels to be free. And he allowed those, like in Kentucky, to keep their slaves for the time being if they stayed loyal to the Union. He had a quote against the social and political equality of Black and white Americans, trying to show that he was not a radical abolitionist, contending, hey, I just think that slavery is immoral, but that doesn't mean that I think Black and white Americans should be on an equal social and political footing as far as power and opportunities of citizenship. He did arguably drag his feet in ending slavery up toward the latter part of the war. And however, he did put in, like William Seward, he did put in some radical Republicans into his cabinet. All right. So keep all that in mind for 26. Now 27 through 30 are found in the textbook. And I want you to do that yourselves, okay? I hope that's okay, but I want to at least leave at least a little bit to you guys as far as your independent studying. So check those out in the textbook. You should be able to find the answers.
Do you know about exactly where, like what chapters that would be?
That's a good
going through
question.
on?
Let's see here.
Just so I could crack the book open and go brief over it again.
No problem. We're looking at firstly, right? I know I shouldn't be telling you this as an instructor because it's kind of a lazy way of doing it. But for one, right, you could look up, like when you look up Free Soil Party, etc. You could go to the back of the book to the index and look that term up, and it'll give you page numbers where it's found. So keep that in mind. But mainly, we're talking about beginning in mainly chapters 13 and 14, the impending crisis. and chapter 14 is the Civil War.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, I think a lot of it a lot of that will be found in chapters 13 and 14 in
Okay.
Alan Brinkley's textbook. Okay,
Thank you.
no problem. All right. So remember, Dunning's thesis is the thesis that it's a pro-South thesis, contending, right, that that which was done for African Americans in the South was not done out of altruism or humanitarian concern, genuinely for African Americans by the Republican Party, namely, but it was done to punish the white Democratic South, right? So when you look at things like, let's see here, racism in the North, Northern recognition of the benefits of arming slaves, absolutely, right? But Dunning's thesis will not will not concentrate on abolitionist sentiment. It's trying to convey an image against that, right? It's revisionist in its origin. So let's see here. African American agency, political participation was impressively high on behalf of African Americans. Um, Churches did seem to serve a pivotal cultural and political role in organizing and encouraging Black Southerners. However, right, you see, according to Eric Foner, I'm going off of his books primarily, Foner, great historian on the Civil War and on slavery, etc., and emancipation. But Eric Foner conveys the fact that initially there was kind of an evolution, that initially African Americans kind of deferred, kind of formed their own hierarchy of people, for lack of a better way of interpreting it. I interpret it as demographics of people who had reason to feel confidence to stand up as the natural leaders on behalf of other African Americans. So people who had already been free for most of their lives and were business owners and had gone to Black schools, right? African Americans who had already fought in the Civil War and fought as soldiers arguably enhanced their self confidence. Preachers and others who had a leg up with literacy and had were accustomed to people looking to them for spiritual succor, for like comfort and encouragement, right? So then he says by 1868, you finally get an evolution of African Americans primarily voting for ex-slaves who had been plantation slaves. And that, of course, was seen as more of a radical change, right? But supposedly that did not initially happen in large numbers. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment established citizenship, defined it very broadly for anyone born or naturalized in any of the states, and that the citizenship, all the rights, privileges, and protections of citizenship were to be guaranteed to you no matter what state you moved into. So that was the 14th. The 13th is what abolished slavery. All right. The 15th made it clear that in case it's not clear that voting and the right for running for office and suffrage be included as far as the rights, privileges, and protections of citizenship, the 15th Amendment made that clear. Okay. Radical congressional reconstruction. They were for a new South economically. They were for educating freedmen. Some were even for land redistribution. And they arguably were, in light of Dunning's thesis, even if you don't really adhere to Dunning's thesis, there is evidence that there was kind of a punitive, punishing element to the radical Republicans in wanting to punish ex-Confederate leaders, not pardon them. And I think I see that in people like Thaddeus Stevens, who showed both humanitarian concern for African Americans, but also a bit of a punitive element in wanting to punish the white South. 35, what was a common explanation for the failure of Reconstruction? I mentioned diminished Northern interest, the Compromise of 1877, the re-enfranchisement of ex-Confederates under Article 2 of the 14th Amendment. They were, if they had, promised to uphold the Constitution and then subsequently joined the rebellion, they were to be disenfranchised for 2 years, but those 2 years ended. And so they're able to get back into politics. All these are used as evidence of Reconstruction eventually failing, and also press coverage of African American misrule of corruption and incompetence, etc. And I talked about that with W.E.B. Du Bois' book on Reconstruction. So all those are true. All right. So are there any questions, you guys, on the test? You guys feel prepared to take it somewhat, or at least more prepared than you had been prior to the video?
Is the test going to be timed?
No, it is not.
Okay.
Yeah,
I only
I could
asked that
not be
because-
more philosophically against the idea of a time test.
Okay. I only asked that because my other 3 classes I'm in, they were timed.
I see. Yeah,
Yeah.
not me. Yeah.
Okay.
I had a question. When does the test open up?
It should be open right now.
Okay.
I finally posted it and had it available as of today's date, just not even quite an hour before this video. So yeah, sorry it took me so long to do that.
Okay, no worries.
All right, so please remember, okay, unlike usual, where you guys have at least 4 days, I need you to submit this by midnight of the 13th going into the 14th. That's only 3 days away, and I apologize for that. All right. You guys have been a good class. You really have. And again, because of your expedited schedule, I've been doubly impressed with you guys. With the regular time schedule, I was able to have 1 assignment per week. And you guys have been doing close to 2 a week. So I'm very proud of that. But I wish you well, ladies. I really appreciate you joining the Zoom meetings. Oftentimes it was the same bunch. And like I said, whatever your score is out of 35 for everyone for that matter, I'm going to add 15 points to make that's the curve to make it out of 50 to your raw score. But in your case here, ladies, I'm going to add 22 points. I'm going to add an additional 7.
Excuse me, Professor. Oh, sorry. You can go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was asking Professor like about the assignment. When would you be grading them?
Yeah, I'm starting today. I'm starting as soon as this video is done. I'm going to begin grading your assignments. I'm so sorry. I
All
know
right.
I've only done the first 2.
Okay,
sadly.
that's fine.
Yeah.
I'm just so curious, like, to know, like, how did I do it?
I
Because with
know,
some of the
I know.
assignments, I wasn't
And-
sure.
Exactly. And I promise you, Zanelle, I will keep that under consideration. That so for instance, when I do the 3rd and 4th assignments, if I find fault with your assignment and say, okay, well, you kind of missed the thesis here, so I'm going to give you 45 out of 50, right?
Okay.
Or
Thank you.
something that could have been rectified in the future. If I see the same, in my eyes, subjectively, kind of, the same fault with your write-up, it won't continue to get a 45. I'll probably give you like a 48 instead, knowing, being cognizant of the fact that you didn't have the chance throughout the semester to get the feedback that you needed. And that's why I did do the 2 assignments early on, no matter how busy I was with my other classes that were due sooner. I wanted to at least give you some feedback, but I promise I'll keep that in mind when I grade your papers, that you guys got very little feedback.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
No problem. That's the least I can do.
Thank you.
No problem. All right. So anybody else? Like I said, I really am. I'm proud of you guys as a class, and I wish I could have met you. I hope you guys are doing well in your personal lives and staying safe, your families as well. If you have any last minute, I know I'm really behind on my messages as well, but please, I'd encourage you, like I put in the announcement of this morning. I hope you received that. If you didn't, please take a look at that. Just giving you just kind of like 5 or 6 reminders for the end of the semester. Don't forget about your quizzes. If you want to make something up, do it now, but let me know, especially if it's one of the first two, so I know to go back to that assignment and look at it and find yours. And if there's something, a variable in your personal life that you've told me in the past about dealing with COVID or something of that sort, please give me one more message this week to remind me so I can make that little note for myself in determining your final grade. Don't get me wrong, most of this is very finite and very mathematical. The points I give you on the accumulated assignments and what you get on your test scores and quizzes are going to simply add up to what they're going to add up to, right? But I give myself the right of giving you a little bit of wiggle room. Let's say, in like, with an extenuating circumstance in your life, and you have like 3 late assignments in a row. So instead of giving you just 35 to 40 points out of 50 because it's late, I may say, you know what, I'm going to do that with one of the 3, but the next 2, I'm going to go ahead and grade her assignment full, whereby she's capable of earning up to 50 points. Okay.
This is kind of off topic. What other classes do you teach besides history?
Oh, thank you for asking, but actually none.
None. Okay.
They usually give me the first or the latter half of U.S. history, split at Reconstruction at the end of the Civil War. Sometimes they give me history. I want to say it's 35, Hispanic American history. Sometimes they'll give me that, and 1 or 2 times they've given me World Civ, which of course I thoroughly enjoy both those other classes, but it's completely out of my hands. And what it looks like now is, I believe in the immediate future with summer and even fall, I believe they've just given me one of the 2 or both of the 2 U.S. history courses. Yeah, that's all I have a master's in. I have a
Oh, okay.
bachelor's in Spanish, but you need a master's in anything that you teach.
Okay. I just ask you because I might be taking the next history and just wanted to know if you teach other history classes besides just this one.
Yes. So yeah, technically the other U.S. history, 17B,
Okay.
they sometimes give that to me as well. But
Okay.
yeah, with the adjuncts, we get whatever we're given, we take. So yeah, it's whatever they give me, and most of the time, like I said, it's one or the other or both, 17A and 17B.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you
Thank
for your
you.
patience, everyone, and your cooperation. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your patience with the grading and your participation in these Zoom meetings. And it makes me happy to give you extra points for participating. All right, so that's it, ladies. You guys have a great future. Take care of yourselves. Finish your schooling, to say the least. And I genuinely wish you well.
Thank you. Have a good summer.
Thank you to
Bye,
you.
All right,
class.
thank you.
Bye,
Okay?
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.